Hey guys, tonight we settle into the quiet dampness of 17th century Japan, not for a grand war or a sweeping political drama, but for the story of a garden snail and the famous man who missed it terribly. You are sitting now, in your mind, on the slightly chilly veranda of a small wood and bamboo cottage. The air is cool and smells faintly of earth and wet leaves. It is the late 1600s, deep in the Edo period, a time of enforced peace and quiet contemplation. You might believe that poets, especially famous ones, live in grand houses filled with servants and expensive silk, constantly attending lavish parties. You probably believe that any person who becomes a household name must be surrounded by noise and attention, like a celebrity today. But for tonight's hero, nothing could be further from the truth. Before you get too comfortable and possibly fall asleep halfway through, tap like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this odd mix of boredom and history. It keeps the channel alive and the stories just sleepy enough to help you drift off again next time. If you are joining us now, maybe let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you. Knowing this helps me feel like we are sharing this quiet space, even across the miles. Now, dim the lights, let the world outside grow quiet, and turn on a fan if you like that soft, steady hum in the background. Let your shoulders loosen and your breathing slow. This is your time to drift. No rush, no deadlines, no noise. Just you, a little warmth in the air, and the faint whisper of history waiting to unfold. So, settle in, and let's ease gently into tonight's journey together. You feel the simple, rough grain of the wood beneath your fingers as you lean against a pillar. The floor is raised slightly off the ground, a defense against the dampness that creeps in from the fertile soil. This isn't a palace. It is the humble dwelling of Matsuo Bashō, perhaps the most famous haiku poet the world has ever known. You see him now, a man in simple, often worn robes, his posture suggesting a stillness that runs bone deep. He is not rushing, not planning a grand future, just being in this present moment. And you find that slowing quality comforting, like a heavy blanket being pulled up to your chin. Bashō lives near Edo, which will one day become the colossal city of Tokyo. But right now, his immediate surroundings are quiet countryside. He prefers the isolation. His life has been one of movement, of long, slow journeys taken on foot, observing the dust, the flowers, and the faces along the road. He has seen the bustle of the cities, but he seeks the silence of the path. You watch him gently sweep the veranda, his movements economical, not a single movement wasted. It is less a chore, and more a form of meditation. You watch the slow passage of time through the window of his quiet existence. He often sits here, overlooking his tiny garden. This small plot of green is not manicured like a European formal garden. It is a wilder, more natural space, where moss is welcomed and imperfections are simply accepted. It is here, among the ferns and the damp stones, that he finds his greatest inspirations. Historians still argue whether his earliest, grandest house was given to him by a wealthy patron or whether he simply rented a series of increasingly humble shacks. But the result is the same, a focus on simplicity. You can smell the subtle, earthy scent of the clay pots where he grows a few herbs, and the slight bitterness of green tea brewing nearby. His celebrity, for a writer of tiny poems, is significant even in this secluded spot. He is a teacher, and young pupils sometimes make the long, polite journey to sit at his feet and learn the essence of sabi and wabi, the Japanese aesthetic concepts that guide his work. Sabi is that beautiful patina of age, the quiet dignity of things worn down by time, like the polished smoothness of the step you are leaning against. Wabi is the understated, rustic elegance found in imperfection and simplicity. If you think your modern life is complicated, imagine trying to distill the entire universe into 17 syllables. That is Bashō's daily challenge. The poet shifts slightly, and you notice his expression. It is not sad, but deeply observant, as if he can see the layers of history in the smallest pebble. This isn't the expression of a man seeking drama. It is the face of a man who understands that the most profound dramas happen in the stillness. A quirky tidbit about this era. Unlike the samurai, who were obsessed with their swords, Bash and his fellow haiku poets became equally obsessed with their inkstones, often carrying their favorites with them on their long travels, treating them almost as sacred objects, necessary for capturing that perfect, fleeting moment. Bashō's life is a fascinating contrast to the mainstream historical fact of the Edo period, the Sakoku policy. While the rest of Japan was tightly locking its borders, severely limiting contact with the outside world, only allowing a tiny trickle of Dutch and Chinese trade. Bash was inwardly expanding his universe. He wasn't traveling abroad, but he was traveling the immense landscape of his own consciousness, using nature as his guide. The physical borders of Japan were closed, but the artistic and spiritual borders of haiku poetry were wide open. Looking for beauty in the utterly ordinary, you watch him settle onto a cushion, his bamboo mat cool beneath him. The light of the late afternoon is soft, filtering through the sliding paper doors, creating long, peaceful shadows. You can feel the quietness settling around you, an almost tangible weight of silence. No distant traffic noise, no insistent screens demanding attention. Just the whisper of wind through the tall, broad leaves of the banana plant he keeps near his hut. This plant is so important to him that he nicknamed his home Bash, and the banana plant hut, which is how he adopted the pen name Matsuo Bashō. The plant itself, exotic and fragile in the Japanese climate, symbolizes his own vulnerable, traveling nature. He picks up a scroll, not to write, but simply to hold, the paper thin and brittle with age. You notice the simple, wooden tools of his craft, a small box for ink sticks, a shallow water bowl, and the grinding stone. Even his possessions reflect wabi. They are functional, beautiful in their plainness, and essential. He never owns anything truly frivolous. You could call it minimalist living, but for Bash, it is simply necessary living. Frivolity adds noise, and noise breaks the delicate thread of observation that he needs to compose his tiny, perfect poems. You watch the way he pours water onto the inkstone and begins the slow, deliberate grind of the black ink stick. The sound is barely a whisper, a gentle, sandy scrape that is rhythmic and deeply soothing. This is his ritual. It takes time, this preparation, and the time spent grinding the ink is time spent clearing the mind, making it ready to receive the poem rather than force it out. The deep, rich smell of the freshly ground ink fills the quiet space, grounding you in this very specific time and place. It is a smell of earth, fire, and ancient wood. The day gently moves towards evening. The shadows lengthen. Bash closes his eyes, inhaling slowly. He is waiting. He is not waiting for a great revelation, just for a small, subtle shift in the light, a single drop of dew, or the sound of a distant river. He waits for the world to reveal its essence to him, 17 syllables at a time. The mainstream fact of the time, the rigid social hierarchy of samurai, farmers, artisans, and merchants, all adhering to strict rules, is completely ignored here in this quiet hut. Bash lives outside of those strict categories, existing in the fluid, gentle world of art. He has rejected the path of the samurai, which he briefly touched as a youth, choosing instead the path of the wanderer and the observer. The air begins to feel cool against your face. You can hear the distant, repetitive chirping of a cricket, a sound that is not jarring but simply part of the background hum of the world. This is the atmosphere. Bash breathes in. He is not seeking adventure, but he is always ready for the tiny, unexpected moments that nature delivers. It is this quiet readiness that will soon lead him to notice a creature so small and slow that most busy people would never pause for it. You lean your head against the pillar, letting the coolness of the wood soak into your skin, feeling the quiet rhythm of the poet's life settle over you, pushing all the hurry and complexity of your own day far away. You are simply watching, simply breathing, simply waiting with him. The feeling of waiting is profound. In our modern rush, waiting is a nuisance. Here, waiting is an art form, a way of inviting the universe into your awareness. You notice the dust motes dancing in the last rays of sun, each tiny particle catching the light, an entire universe contained in a single beam. Bashō's mind works like this, taking the smallest detail and expanding its meaning until it holds everything. This focus on the minute detail is a key feature of the poetry of this time. It reflects a very deep respect for the natural world, seeing all life, no matter how small or slow, as inherently valuable. You realize that a poet who travels for hundreds of miles just to see a famous moon rising over a certain rice field is exactly the sort of person who will stop and truly see a snail. You feel a soft sigh escape your own lungs, mirroring the deep relaxation you feel watching the unhurried life of the poet. The sounds are now only the natural ones, the distant, gentle rush of water, the creaking of the bamboo in the breeze, and the nearly silent scrape of the ink stick. You sink lower, feeling the peace of the bash, and envelop you. This quiet is not empty. It is full of potential, full of the unseen histories of the small and overlooked. You realize that the whole purpose of Bash's life is to pay attention, to notice the things you and I usually hurry past. That deliberate slowness is the true foundation of his art. And it is the foundation of the very gentle story that is now unfolding around you. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the gentle, cool air caress your face. You know the poet is still there, still waiting, and you feel entirely safe in this quiet, distant space. You open your eyes again, adjusting to the dim, serene light within the poet's residence. You are now inside the tiny house, the Bash, and you take a slow inventory of its contents. It is a study in sparseness. If you think your apartment is small, this hut takes simplicity to an extreme. There are no heavy wooden chests filled with unnecessary goods, no towering piles of books, and certainly no distracting modern screens. Everything here is functional, beautiful in its plainness, and easily moved. The whole aesthetic is designed to keep the mind light and unburdened. You would be surprised at how few possessions you actually need to live a rich, contemplative life. A lesson Bash embodies perfectly. The floor is covered with straw mats or tatami, which give off a faint, grassy scent when you settle down on them. The mats are cool under your legs, a pleasant contrast to the warmth of the tea bowl you might be holding. You notice how the walls are paper thin. Literally, they are sliding doors, or shuji, made of wooden lattices covered in translucent white paper. They do not offer much insulation from the cold, which is why Bash often had to travel to warmer regions in the winter. But they do something wonderful for the light. The light that passes through the shu is diffused, gentle, and utterly soft. It banishes harsh shadows and turns the interior into a perpetually calm, luminous space. You watch as a slight breeze makes the paper walls tremble just a bit, and the light inside dances softly. This is a subtle, constant reminder of the impermanence of things, a core concept in the Buddhist thought that influences Bash deeply. Everything, like the light on the wall, is beautiful because it is fleeting. The most imposing feature of the hut is, surprisingly, not the inside, but the outside view through one of the open panels. There, just beyond the veranda, stands the banana plant, the Bash, for which the hut is named. You see the huge, soft, paddle-shaped leaves, easily damaged by the wind or frost. They are not strong, yet they provide the identity for the poet's sanctuary. This vulnerability of the plant is also part of its charm. It requires protection and care, reminding the poet of the fragility of life. Historians still argue whether the Bash plant was imported specifically for him as a gift, or if it was simply a natural curiosity he adopted, but its symbolic value is clear. A tropical plant thriving precariously in a temperate climate, much like the sensitive poet himself. You watch as the poet goes about his daily routine. It is a pattern defined by observation and quiet maintenance. His day begins early, before the harsh light of the sun has fully conquered the morning mist. he would rise, perform simple ablutions, and then spend a long period in contemplation or reading ancient Chinese and Japanese poetry. There is no rushing through breakfast. He eats simple food, likely rice, pickled vegetables, and perhaps miso soup, a meager meal by modern standards, but sufficient for his needs. The lack of heavy food adds to the feeling of lightness and clarity he cultivates. You could call it breakfast, though no one's appetite agreed with the sheer austerity of the morning fare. It is more about fueling the mind than satisfying the body. A quirky or fringe tidbit of the time that affected Bash. During the Edo period, bathhouses were incredibly popular public spaces, often acting as social centers. While samurai were strictly separated, writers and commoners could often mingle, and these spaces were sources of gossip and informal education. Bash, though seeking solitude, would occasionally dip into these public baths, momentarily trading the silence of the banana hut for the warm, steamy social hum. However, his true work, the deep composition, required only the quiet. After the morning's quiet devotion, the poet's time is dedicated to teaching, if students are present, or to the slow art of composition. You watch him grind the ink, the steady, rhythmic motion that is a precursor to writing. The haiku, the form he perfected, requires absolute precision. It is the art of capturing a profound moment, a sound, a sight, a realization, in a precise structure of 5-7-5 syllables. This structure forces the poet to eliminate every extraneous word, leaving only the sharp, resonant core of the observation. It is a slow, quiet, demanding craft, like whittling a single, perfect piece of wood. You see Bash, sitting upright, his ink prepared, his eyes gazing out at the garden. He is waiting for the moment to speak, not with his voice, but with his brush. He is not trying to invent a poem. He is trying to discover it, waiting for the universe to hand it to him fully formed. You feel the slow passage of time as you observe him. If you were a 21st century person here, you would be incredibly bored, perhaps checking your phone constantly. But here, in the 17th century, there is a profound sense of enoughness. The quiet is enough. The single banana plant is enough. The sound of water dripping from the eaves after a rain shower is enough. The quiet, mainstream, historical fact of this era is the proliferation of woodblock printing. While Basho's early works were circulated by hand in manuscripts, the rise of affordable printing allowed his poems to reach a wider audience than ever before. This contrast is interesting. A man obsessed with quiet solitude and the beauty of the transient moment was being broadcast widely across the nation through mass-produced books. His work, which celebrates the smallness of the world, was achieving a monumental level of fame, an unintended consequence of the printing revolution. You feel the stillness of the afternoon settling in. The only movement is the occasional rustle of the bash leaves, a sound like soft, dry silk rubbing together. It is an extremely relaxing sound, a gentle shush from nature itself. The light is turning a deeper gold now, signaling the mid-point of the day. You realize that his simple routine is a defense mechanism. It protects the sensitive observation necessary for his art. When he is not writing, he is walking. His great journeys, which would eventually lead to the classic text, "The narrow road to the deep north," were taken mostly on foot. Imagine walking for months, carrying only a minimum of possessions, including that precious inkstone. Every step is slow, deliberate, and mindful. This continuous slow movement heightens the senses. When you are moving at a walking pace, you see everything: the moss on the stones, the flight of a cicada, the changing color of the mud, and the slow, deliberate journey of a garden snail. This intentional slowness is the key to understanding the story that is about to unfold. If Bashō had been a busy merchant rushing through his day, or a samurai focused on the strict codes of his class, he never would have noticed the subject of his most famous poem. He only noticed because his entire life was a patient, sustained exercise in noticing. He taught his students that poetry wasn't about clever metaphors. It was about the simple, honest rendering of reality as it is perceived in a moment of heightened awareness. You recall the earlier image of the lamplight trembling across damp cobblestones. Even that visual is important. It captures the texture of the scene. Bashō seeks out this texture in everything. He wants to feel the roughness, the dampness, the coolness, the warmth. He wants the reader of his poem to feel those sensations too. And in this small, quiet hut, the only textures available are the most natural ones: straw, bamboo, paper, earth, and the faint, sweet smell of the banana plant's leaves. The evening approaches slowly, bringing a slightly chilly dampness with it. You watch Bashō perform the final ritual of his daily life, preparing for the night. He doesn't have a huge, curtained bed. He rolls out a simple futon onto the tatami floor. This is a very close connection to the earth, a humble and immediate way to rest. There are no barriers between him and the natural world, only the thin paper walls and the quiet space of the Bashō. And you feel a soft tension release from your own neck muscles as you watch his unhurried movements. He is lighting a very small lamp, the oil flickering gently, casting deep, slow shadows across the paper wall. The light is just enough to see by, but not enough to banish the night entirely. This preference for soft, low light is perfect for the kind of quiet, deep reflection he engages in just before sleep. It is a time when the mind is allowed to drift, and the day's observations can settle into place. Historians still argue whether the Bashō leaves he used to roof his hut in the earliest days were truly effective against the rain, or if the hut was perpetually damp and slightly leaky. This debate highlights the central idea of his aesthetic: the beauty found in a slightly leaky roof, the quiet music of a drip in the darkness, the acceptance of imperfection. This acceptance is profoundly relaxing. You are not fighting the world here. You are living in quiet harmony with it, even if that harmony means occasionally getting a little damp. You realize that Bashō's life is itself a poem, a slow, profound statement about the value of simplicity. You close your eyes again, listening to the soft scrape as he prepares his last tea of the night. The sound is utterly calming, pushing you gently toward rest. The next morning, you find yourself still wrapped in the quiet cocoon of the bash. And the air is cool and moist, carrying the clean scent of nearby running water and the pervasive aroma of damp earth. As the sun rises, the soft light begins to filter through the Fuji panels, casting stripes of pure white illumination across the rice mats. You observe the poet beginning his day, the rhythm identical to the day before. Quiet rising, contemplation, simple food, and the slow preparation of ink. But today, your focus shifts, directed by the poet's own gentle gaze, toward the minute details of the outside world, specifically the small, wild area he calls his garden. This garden is not a showcase. It is a space where nature is allowed to dictate the terms. You see the various shades of green, the deep, velvety green of the moss that blankets the base of the stones, the brighter green of new ferns uncurling their delicate heads, and the soft, enormous green of the banana plant leaves towering overhead. It is here, among the damp soil and the shadows, that your eyes and the poet's eyes are drawn to something moving with profound and intentional slowness. You see a specific garden snail, a creature of humble origins, whose shell is a perfect, tiny, spiraling sculpture. Its movement is so gradual, it is almost imperceptible. It glides over the rough texture of a stone, leaving a faint, glistening trail behind it. This is not a fast world. Speed is a modern invention, a modern anxiety. In 17th century Japan, movement is measured in the unhurried pace of feet, carts, boats, and, in this tiny corner of the garden, the deliberate crawl of the snail. This small creature has become, without realizing it, a part of Bashō's quiet routine. Every morning, when Bash takes his tea, he sits and watches the garden. He is observing the change in the dew, the shift in the breeze, the opening of a flower, and the snail's progress across the stone. He does not try to hurry it, name it, or interfere with its life. He simply acknowledges its presence. The snail is a tiny, perfect embodiment of patience and perseverance. It carries its whole house on its back, a portable shelter of elegant design, and it requires nothing but moisture and the soft surface of the earth to sustain its journey. A mainstream historical fact of this era is that while the snail moves slowly, the postal service in Edo, Japan, through relays of runners and horses on the T-Kaida Road, was remarkably efficient for communicating over long distances. So, while Bash was watching something move at less than a millimeter per minute, letters were flying across the country at a speed that would have felt miraculous to earlier generations. This contrast highlights the poet's choice to ignore the speed of man and embrace the slowness of nature. You find yourself completely absorbed in the snail's effort. You watch as it encounters a tiny ridge in the stone, a monumental obstacle in its world. Its antennae tentatively explore the edge, and its soft body seems to gather its minuscule strength to overcome the slight elevation. The struggle is silent, slow, and completely private. This deliberate, silent effort is profoundly calming to observe. You realize that you often rush past your own small obstacles, but the snail demonstrates the dignity of taking your time, step by infinitesimal step. Bash, through his steady observation, sees this tiny creature not as a pest, but as a fellow traveler, a subject worthy of poetry. This is the essence of wabi, sabi, finding deep, resonant beauty in the small, the imperfect, and the ephemeral. The shell is not smooth and pristine. It is slightly chipped, perhaps covered in a faint layer of green moss or dried dirt, showing the evidence of its long, slow life. That imperfection, that record of journeying, makes it beautiful. A quirky tidbit from the world of haiku. Bash was part of a tradition that often composed renga, or linked verse, where multiple poets would contribute alternating stanzas. Sometimes, the subject matter could be deliberately mundane, or even slightly ridiculous, just to challenge the poets. This deliberate focus on the mundane paved the way for a serious, quiet observation of something as overlooked as a garden snail. They practiced giving weight to the light and the ordinary. You watch as the day progresses, following the snail's path. It eventually moves off the stone and onto the smooth, damp earth near the base of the banana plant. The huge, soft leaves of the bash cast a deep, cool shadow, a kind of sanctuary. The snail seems to disappear into the damp undergrowth, hidden from the direct sun. This predictable movement, from the exposed rock in the morning to the cool shelter by midday, becomes an anchor in the poet's life. It is a tiny, natural clock, marking the passage of the hours without needing a bell or a gong. Historians still argue whether the poet ever gave the snail a formal name, or if he deliberately kept it nameless to preserve its purity as a symbol of nature. Given his dedication to the objective truth of observation, it is likely he left it as an anonymous traveler, allowing the concept of snail, ness, its slowness, its self-sufficiency, its gentle presence, to inspire his thoughts, rather than turning it into a pet. This namelessness gives the creature a universal quality. It is every snail, and therefore, it is life itself, moving slowly forward. You feel the atmosphere shift as the sun begins its slow descent, pulling the shadows longer and cooling the air again. The sound environment is now incredibly sparse. The soft movement of the bamboo, a slight, almost inaudible drone of an insect, and the distant, constant whisper of the nearby river. These sounds are not demanding, they simply are. They form a natural, ambient soundtrack for the poet's concentration. Bash picks up his brush now, perhaps to write to a student or a friend. Describing his current mood, he might mention the quality of the light or the recent rainfall. He does not write about the snail yet, but the observation of the tiny creature is already filtering into his consciousness. It is a quiet thought, a seed of an idea planted in the fertile ground of his mind, waiting for the perfect conditions to sprout into a poem. The idea of the tiny snail provides a wonderful counterpoint to a recurring historical comparison. If you think your modern house is full of noise, try living in a 17th century castle in Europe, where the walls echoed with shouts, the clang of armor, and the constant movement of servants. Bashō's hut is a deliberate rejection of that kind of noise. His choice of dwelling and his choice of subject matter is a celebration of profound quietude. He is an ambassador for the tiny, gentle life that is often drowned out by the noise of human ambition. You let your eyelids droop slightly, feeling the deep relaxation of this observed quietude. You realize that being forced to focus on something as slow as a snail actually slows your own internal clock. Your thoughts, usually racing, begin to glide, taking their time, finding the beauty in their own gradual movement. This is the magic of Bashō's world. He uses the small to subdue the large, the slow to defeat the fast. The snail's path, from one corner of the garden to another, is a major journey for it. You imagine the world from its perspective, a vast landscape of rough soil, monumental stones, and huge, waving green leaves that must seem like the roof of the sky. The poet shares in this perspective. He has walked hundreds of miles himself, and he understands the dignity of a long, sustained journey taken at a humble pace. He respects the effort, the silent commitment to the path. You settle in further, drawing a slow, deliberate breath. The cool, damp air feels clean and refreshing. You hear the faint, soft scrape of Bashō's brush on the paper as he completes his letter, but he puts it down quickly, his writing for the day finished. He returns his gaze to the garden, where the snail is now completely hidden, resting for the night in the shadows beneath the banana plant. The world feels safe and predictable in its slow, natural rhythms. This tiny creature has become the unsung co-star of the poet's solitary existence, the quiet focus of his meditative gaze, and you feel that deep, calming sense of continuity. The quiet routine, once established, felt like a deep, predictable sigh of contentment within the Bash, and the rhythm of the days was measured not by clocks, but by the light filtering through the shoe, Jai and the silent, slow pilgrimage of the garden snail. You had grown accustomed to its presence, its patient journey across the rough garden stones, and its timely retreat beneath the cool, sheltering leaves of the banana plant. The expectation of seeing that tiny, spiraled shell became a quiet anchor in the poet's mind, and by extension, in your own observation. But one morning, the predictable rhythm broke. You are sitting, as usual, watching the sun's soft illumination wash over the damp garden. Bashō is there, too, holding his morning tea, his gaze already settled on the stone where the snail usually began its day. The stone is there, perfectly mossy and cool, still glistening with the dew of the early morning. But the small, silent shape that should be making its tentative way across the surface is gone. The tiny traveler is absent. Bashō does not react dramatically. There is no sudden gasp, no frustrated movement. His stillness deepens, his gaze unwavering. You watch him trace the area with his eyes, slowly and thoroughly, examining the stone's edges, the nearby ferns, and the rich, dark soil at the base of the bash plant. The creature is not merely hidden, it seems to have vanished entirely. The snail's sudden absence creates a vacuum in the morning air. It is a tiny void, but in a life so intensely focused on the small and the immediate, this absence is monumental. It is a quiet, unexpected rupture in the fabric of his meticulously observed world. This is not the grief one feels for a person, but the subtle, persistent melancholy felt when a quiet, beautiful piece of the natural order unexpectedly disappears. It is the feeling of a pattern disrupted, a silent companion lost to the larger world. You realize how much the poet had relied on that constant, slow presence for his sense of peace. The snail was a living meditation, anon demanding focus for his quiet mind. Now, that focus is missing, and the emptiness is surprisingly loud. He continues to search, not for hours, but for several prolonged moments, his eyes scanning the intricate texture of the ground. He moves a loose leaf with the tip of his finger, gently, almost apologetically, but finds nothing. The snail is truly gone, perhaps eaten by a bird, or perhaps it simply continued its slow journey beyond the confines of his small garden, seeking new territory. This melancholy, this quiet grief over a tiny, lost thing, is a key component of Bashō's aesthetic. It is related to the Japanese concept of aware or mono no aware, the poignant realization of the transient nature of beauty and life. The beauty of the snail was tied to its existence, and its disappearance makes that beauty all the more sharp and unforgettable. The profound sadness comes from the understanding that even the slowest creatures eventually move on, and all things are fleeting. A mainstream historical fact of the Edo period. While Bashō mourned the absence of a garden snail, the government was enforcing incredibly strict rules on internal travel, requiring travelers to have specific permits and checks at every checkpoint, primarily to keep the feudal lords from forming alliances. For the poet, who traveled constantly, this bureaucratic reality was an annoyance, but the snail faced no such checkpoints. It simply slid away, exercising a freedom that man, in this era, had largely forfeited. The snail's escape is silent and unpoliced. You observe the poet settle back down, the tea now cooling in his hands. He does not lament the loss aloud. He internalizes it, allowing the feeling of quiet emptiness to simply exist. He does not try to dismiss the sadness as silly or insignificant, because he knows that all feelings, no matter how small their origin, are valid and rich material for art. The disappearance of the snail becomes a prompt for deep reflection on the nature of attachment and release. A quirky or fringe tidbit from the history of Japanese gardens. During this time, garden designers often went to extraordinary lengths to control nature, meticulously pruning trees and placing stones. Bashō's garden, by contrast, was a quiet rebellion against this formality, allowing the weeds and the wildlife, like the snail, to flourish naturally. The snail's departure is the ultimate statement of that wildness. Even in a small, contained space, nature cannot be truly owned or controlled. You remember the earlier comparison. If you think your apartment is drafty, try a 14th century castle. Here, the sorrow is equally present, but it is not loud or violent. It is a slow, quiet ache, like the distant, repetitive chirping of a cricket, that you only notice when the surrounding noise finally falls silent. The subsequent days are marked by a slight, almost imperceptible shift in the poet's routine. He still looks at the stone, but the expectation has faded, replaced by the memory of the snail's spiral shell. He starts writing, not a letter, but poetry. He grinds his ink more slowly than usual, the sandy scrape of the stone against the stick becoming a gentle, meditative sound, a perfect background noise for sleep. He is working toward capturing the moment of absence, the feeling of quiet loss, and the snail's dignity in carrying its home everywhere. Historians still argue whether the poet ever saw another snail take up residence on that specific stone, or if the original snail's departure marked the end of that particular observation. The purity of the story, however, suggests the latter. The lost snail remains unique in his memory, a singular point of profound, miniature drama. You watch the afternoon light creep across the tatami mats, and you realize that Bash is slowly, carefully distilling his grief into words. He is searching for the perfect 17 syllables that will transform this mundane, quiet event into something universal. He must find words that are simple enough to describe a snail, but resonant enough to express the deep, quiet feeling of loss. He avoids any grandiose language, seeking only the precise, honest truth of the moment. The poem will not be about sadness. It will be about the snail's shell, the mountain, and the slow, necessary movement of life. The air in the hut is heavy with this quiet contemplation. You feel the slow, deliberate pace of the poet's mind working, the gears turning with almost painful slowness, rejecting words, testing syllables, until the image is perfectly clear. This slow struggle to find the right words is intensely relaxing to observe. It is the soundless work of art being born from silence and observation. You lean against the pillar, letting the cool wood press gently against your spine, and you let the quiet anticipation wash over you. The poet is close to finding the words that will grant the lost snail a form of quiet, gentle immortality. You wait with him, wrapped in the profound, comforting stillness of the 17th century Japanese countryside, far away from all modern clamor. The sound of the wind through the tall, broad leaves of the banana plant acts like a soft, constant lullaby. The initial shock of the snail's sudden absence gave way to a persistent, gentle ache, a feeling the poet nurtured rather than pushed away. You watched Bash spend the next few days in deep contemplation, the world reduced to the simple instruments of his craft. The loss was a small, quiet weight, perfectly suited to the profound minimalism of his art. This period was characterized by grief, memory, and ink, the quiet process of turning fleeting reality into permanent poetry. He spends long stretches sitting motionless, gazing at the patch of garden where the tiny creature once journeyed. The stone is still there, the moss still velvety green, but the vital, spiraling center of attention is gone. This act of staring into an absence is the most profound form of remembrance. He is not just looking at the garden. He is looking at the ghost of the snail's trail, recalling the minute movements, the hesitant exploration of the antenna, and the weight of the tiny shell. You watch him now, hunched over his low desk. He meticulously prepares the sumi ink, the sandy grind against the stone, serving as a sonic anchor to the present moment. A soft, scratching rhythm that pushes all hurried thoughts away. The deep, earthy scent of the ink fills the space, a smell of concentration and age. He selects a small brush, its tip perfectly shaped and dampened, ready to translate a huge emotional moment into a tiny structure. He has spent days trying to encapsulate the feeling. He knows the poem must not be overly sentimental. It must be a clean, sharp image that carries the emotion within it, without stating the emotion explicitly. This is the difference between writing about sadness and writing about an object that causes sadness. The Japanese aesthetic demands that the poet trusts the reader to feel the intended emotion when presented with the unadorned image. He dips the brush, holds his breath, and begins to write. The poem he ultimately completes, the one inspired by this tiny, lost creature, is one of his most famous, Katatsumori the snail, Sara ni kaku no baraita, climb Mount Fuji, Fuji no Yamadasa, but slowly, slowly. You watch the calligraphy form on the thin paper. Bash writes the words not just as syllables, but as brushstrokes, each line a deliberate, powerful statement. The poem, translated more literally for a better understanding, reads snail, climbing Mount Fuji. This is not a dramatic or complex poem. It contains only simple nouns and one verb. Yet, in those 17 syllables, he captures the monumental feeling of the small loss. By comparing the snail's minuscule, slow journey to the ascent of Mount Fuji, the largest, most sacred, and most imposing structure in Japan, he achieves a beautiful, humorous irony that is intensely poignant. A quirky tidbit about this composition: while the poem is often translated as climbing Mount Fuji, some scholars argue the word noborite can simply mean upward movement or ascending. This slight ambiguity deepens the poem's effect. Is the snail literally attempting the impossible, or is it merely demonstrating the dignity of its continuous upward effort, even on a small stone? The gentle ambiguity is far more relaxing and thought-provoking than a loud, definitive statement. The humor in the poem is subtle, sleepy, and quiet. You can imagine Bashō smiling slightly to himself as he writes the image. The idea of this tiny creature, inching along, being asked to climb the massive volcano, is inherently funny. But the humor doesn't mock the snail. It honors its commitment to its path. It is a gentle, playful challenge that elevates the snail from a garden pest to a dignified traveler. This mild, quiet irony is perfectly suited for a bedtime story. It provides a gentle smile without causing any loud excitement. A mainstream historical fact: Mount Fuji, which features in the poem, was officially closed to women until the Meiji Restoration in 1868. However, It was a central religious and artistic symbol for all of Japan, and its presence in poetry and art was unavoidable. By juxtaposing this huge, restricted symbol of Japanese identity with the tiny, unrestricted snail, Bashō quietly highlights the natural world's freedom against the structured constraints of human society. The poem functions as a meditation on effort and perspective. The snail, carrying its shell house, is already engaged in a lifelong journey, always moving, always striving. For the snail, the garden stone is as vast and demanding as Mount Fuji is to a human traveler. The poet, himself a great traveler, who often walked hundreds of miles across rugged terrain, understood this perfectly. He knew that the magnitude of the effort is relative to the size of the traveler. You watch Bashō gently set his brush down. The ink is still wet on the page, shining darkly. He looks up, his gaze soft, and you feel the weight of the grief lift, replaced by the quiet satisfaction of having found the precise words. The small loss has now been transformed into a lasting, beautiful artifact. The snail, though gone from the garden, is now immortal, forever climbing the vast, metaphorical mountain in the world of poetry. Historians still argue whether Bashō wrote the poem immediately after the snail's disappearance, or if it took him weeks to distill the feeling. The consensus, however, is that this kind of perfect simplicity requires immense effort and time. It is the result of deep, slow concentration, not a quick burst of inspiration. The time taken to write the poem is part of the story. It is the slow, grinding process of turning observed reality into art. The ambient sounds of the 17th century countryside continue to serve as a calming backdrop. You hear the soft, occasional hiss of the nearby fire where the kettle is warming, a low, steady sound that anchors the scene. There are no sudden jolts or loud noises, only the quiet persistence of the natural world. The poet's ability to find such profound meaning in such a small subject is the core of the soothing experience. He demonstrates that you don't need grand spectacles or loud dramas to feel deeply, or to create something lasting. You only need quiet observation and respect for the smallest elements of life. This realization is profoundly relaxing, inviting you to seek the meaning in the overlooked details of your own life. You reflect on the beauty of the haiku structure itself. It is small, contained, and requires the poet to rely entirely on evocative imagery rather than lengthy description. This forced brevity is deeply soothing. The poem doesn't explain or argue. It simply presents an image and then steps back, letting the image resonate in the quiet of the mind. The entire energy of the section is one of slow, painstaking creation, a process that moves at the speed of the snail itself, deliberate and perfect. The light outside is now deep orange, slanting through the bamboo stalks. You feel a familiar, gentle sense of warmth settling over you, the comfort of knowing that even the smallest loss can result in something beautiful and eternal. The poet's melancholy has been transformed into a quiet, enduring work of art. Section 6. Having witnessed the quiet, profound effort, that culminated in the snail's haiku. You now turn your attention to the structure itself, appreciating how the haiku form and flow contribute to its unique, soothing power. Bash did not invent this form, but he perfected it, raising the haikai from a light, sometimes frivolous court game, into a serious poetic endeavor capable of carrying immense spiritual weight. The power of the haiku lies in its constraint, the precise, unyielding 5-7-5 syllable structure. This strict framework is actually deeply relaxing, both for the poet and the reader. For the poet, it demands absolute focus, stripping away all unnecessary words until only the resonant core remains. For the listener, the brevity and formal rhythm provide a moment of complete poetic clarity, a tiny, perfect window onto the world that opens and closes quickly, leaving a lasting impression without requiring long attention or intellectual strain. It is the perfect structure for easing into sleep, because it engages the mind briefly, then releases it to drift. You trace the shape of the snail poem again. Katatsumuri are 5 syllables. Sara ni kaku no bright dali 7 syllables. Fuji no yama are 5 syllables. The natural flow of the Japanese language allows these short lines to carry a vast amount of imagery. The words are simple, almost childlike in their directness. Snail, climbing Mount Fuji. There is no flowery language, no complex explanation, only image stacked upon image. This stark clarity is the hallmark of Bashō's style and the key to its gentle efficacy. A mainstream historical fact about the haiku forms, while we think of 5-7-5 now, during Bashō's time, this form was still deeply rooted in renga, or linked verse, where 3 lines were often just the opening stanza, or hokku, that would be continued by other poets. Bash was instrumental in isolating the hokku and treating it as a complete, independent poem, thus creating the stand, a lone art form we now call the haiku. He gave the simple opening stanza the full weight of philosophical reflection. The power of the poem is held in the sudden, vast contrast between the first and the last image. The first line, Katatsumuri's snail, grounds you immediately in the small, damp world of the garden. Then, the third line, Fuji no Yama's Mount Fuji, rips the perspective wide open, expanding the small garden stone into a huge snow-capped mountain. The middle line, Sara ni kaku nobarite, climbing, or ascending, is the quiet hinge that makes the massive shift possible. It reminds you that the action is the same, regardless of the scale. It is a slow, quiet effort of ascent. This sudden shift in scale is a technique that is surprisingly comforting. It teaches the quiet lesson that your own small struggles, your daily efforts, are as significant in their way as any epic undertaking. The slow journey of the snail is just as worthy of respect as the arduous climb of a great mountain. This equivalence of effort, whether tiny or huge, is a deeply relaxing thought that minimizes the anxiety of modern life, a quirky or fringe tidbit from poetic history. Bash and his contemporaries used kigo, a season word, in their poems to anchor the scene in a specific time of year. In the snail poem, there is no obvious kigo, but the snail itself is often considered a gentle sign of late spring or early summer, when the ground is damp and warm, signaling a time of growth and slow, continuous movement. This subtle seasonality adds another layer of quiet, natural continuity to the poem, even in the absence of explicit references to cherry blossoms or autumn leaves. The repetition of the soft, sibilant sounds in the Japanese original, the Sara and Sumuri, adds to the sleepy, rhythmic cadence of the poem when spoken softly. It is the sound of quiet persistence, like the faint, soft hiss of wind through the tall grass you can hear now in the periphery of your mind. Bashō's genius was in choosing words whose very sounds mirrored the gentle, unhurried subject matter. The entire composition acts as a quiet, repetitive mantra, perfect for inducing rest. You let your eyelids droop slightly, feeling the peaceful weight of the form itself. The haiku, by being so short, forces your mind to fill in the vast space between the images. You are forced to imagine the snail's effort, the size of the mountain, and the slow, quiet journey. This gentle, imaginative work is much more calming than having a lengthy narrative explained to you. It is creative rest. Historians still argue whether Bash intended the snail poem to be read as purely humorous or deeply philosophical. The reality, as in much of his work, is that it is both. The sleepy humor, the tiny creature tackling the massive volcano, makes you smile, but the philosophical reflection on effort and perspective makes you pause and reflect quietly. It is a perfect blend of light touch and deep meaning, without the harshness of modern cynicism or the exhausting demand of heavy moralizing. The entire aesthetic of the 17th century Japanese poet's life, you realize, was an intentional preparation for this kind of writing. His refusal of noise, his devotion to the wabi-sabi of simple things, and his long, slow walks prepared his senses to capture the immense significance of the tiny. If he had been rushing, he never would have slowed his internal clock enough to notice the profound, quiet dignity of the snail's departure. You remember the earlier image of the lamplight trembling across damp cobblestones. That image, too, relies on simple nouns and an evocative verb to create a full sensory experience. Bash poetry works exactly the same way. It takes the ordinary elements of the natural world and presents them with such clear honesty that they instantly become extraordinary, transforming the mundane into a source of quiet wonder. The silence in the Bash and is complete now. The poet's work is done. The poem is written. The ink is dry. And the memory of the lost snail is now safely contained within the perfect structure of 17 syllables. The form ensures that the sentiment is protected from becoming overly sentimental or loud. It remains small, gentle, and profoundly true to the moment of quiet loss and subsequent reflection. You close your eyes fully, breathing in the imaginary scent of cool, damp paper and rich, dry ink, letting the soft rhythm of the 5/7/5 structure lull your thoughts into a restful, slow pace. The snail is climbing slowly, perfectly, forever. The poem is finished, the process of observation, loss, and creation is complete. But the story of the lost garden snail does not end within the bamboo walls of the Bash-an. Its final, most calming chapter is the long, gentle arc of the snail's immortal journey. How a brief moment of quiet melancholy was projected outward to influence centuries of art and contemplation. You watch Bash in the following weeks, sharing this poem with his students and fellow poets. It is through this quiet circulation that the snail truly begins its immortal climb up the metaphorical Mount Fuji. The poem spreads because it resonates. It captures a universal human experience. The deep feeling one can have for a small, non-human companion, and the melancholy that comes with all farewells, even the silent ones. The poem is a testament to the poet's conviction that no experience, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, is unworthy of art. The impact of this simplicity is profoundly calming for the readers of the time, who lived in a world dictated by rigid social hierarchies and the demanding expectations of the feudal system. The haiku offered a moment of escape. It directed their attention away from the grand, stressful dramas of human politics and toward the enduring, quiet dignity of nature. The poem invites them to pause their own frantic journeys and consider the patient, perfect pace of the snail. This shift in focus from the chaotic human world to the orderly natural world is the ultimate sleep aid contained within the poem. A mainstream historical fact of the later Edo period is that travel became slightly easier for commoners and pilgrims, leading to an increased reverence for places like Mount Fuji. The snail poem tapped directly into this rising cultural consciousness of travel, pilgrimage, and the majesty of the mountain. It subtly suggested that a great journey did not require a pilgrimage permit or a large purse. It only required the snail's quiet, steady commitment. You feel the stillness of the afternoon as you reflect on the poem's longevity. It is still being read, translated, and contemplated centuries later, having survived wars, political upheavals, and massive cultural shifts. The smallness of the subject matter is what allowed it to endure. A poem about a great war or a political figure might fade when the context is lost. But a poem about a snail climbing a mountain is instantly accessible because the natural world remains constant. A quirky or fringe tidbit, the deliberate simplicity of the haiku structure itself influenced several 20th century literary movements, particularly in Western poetry, like imagism, which sought to strip language of its excess and focus on direct, sharp imagery. Bashō's humble snail, therefore, became a quiet, powerful revolutionary, changing the way poets across the world approached brevity and image. The soft, gentle power of the poem lay in its refusal to be verbose or loud. You remember the earlier detail about the poet's humble tools, the small box for ink sticks, and the shallow water bowl. These simple instruments, now long turned to dust, managed to capture and preserve an emotion far more vast and enduring than the greatest bronze monument. This idea that the simplest tools and the quietest subject can yield the most lasting beauty is intensely comforting. It minimizes the perceived necessity for grand scale and maximum effort in your own life. The sensory details of the bash and remain strong even as the time progresses. You can still smell the faint, grassy scent of the tatami mats and the deep, rich aroma of the sumi ink. You hear the occasional, soft rustle of the banana leaves, a gentle sound like dry silk that serves as the ambient soundtrack to the poet's enduring fame. This atmosphere is the essential ingredient. Without the quiet, there would be no observation. Without the observation, there would be no snail. Historians still argue whether Bashō would have preferred his poetry to be recited aloud or contemplated silently. Given his life's dedication to solitude and quiet observation, it's likely he intended his poems to be experienced internally, letting the image resonate in the still, dark corners of the mind, which is exactly the kind of gentle mental activity that prepares one for sleep. The comparison to a modern, drafty apartment highlights the ultimate comfort offered by this story. Bashō's life, though physically sparse, was rich in attention. He traded the constant noise and draft of the outside world for the warm, contained richness of his own observations. He reminds you that you don't need to chase grand events to feel fulfilled. You only need to pay quiet attention to the small life unfolding right in front of you. Or perhaps right in your own garden. The poem's quiet genius is that it makes the vast Mount Fuji feel manageable and the small, the snail, feel epic. It collapses the distance between your daily struggle and a magnificent achievement. The snail, climbing slowly, is simply demonstrating the dignity of persistence. This is the final, most soothing thought the poet leaves you with. The quiet reassurance that your own steady, slow journey through life is noble, worthy, and beautiful. You are, in your own way, slowly climbing your own Mount Fuji. The final image fades, the spiraled shell, the massive volcano, and the quiet, persistent effort of ascent, held forever in 17 simple syllables. The light in the bash, and is now almost entirely gone. The paper doors translucent and gray in the final moments before night takes hold. You have followed the trail of the snail, and the path has led you to a place of complete, profound stillness. The quiet has finally settled entirely over the ancient world we have been observing. The image of the tiny snail, forever inching its way up the side of the great mountain, has done its work, leaving behind only the soft echo of effort and peace. You can feel the coolness of the tatami mats and the gentle presence of the banana plant outside, its large, soft leaves rustling a final, sleepy greeting. Now is the time to let go of the last few threads of the story, to allow the history to dissolve completely into atmosphere. You don't need to hold onto the words anymore, only the feeling of stillness they created. Feel the deep, steady rhythm of your breathing, slow and regular, a sound more calming than any distant noise. The weight of the day is lifting from your shoulders, melting away into the floor beneath you. Every muscle you were holding tense is now completely relaxed, heavy, and warm. You are sinking down, feeling perfectly safe and perfectly still. The images are fading, turning into soft, indistinct shapes behind your closed eyes. The snail is a quiet, perfect symbol of slowness, and you are embracing that slowness now. There is no rush to find the ending, no need to worry about tomorrow. There is only this moment, this profound quiet, and the gentle, constant promise of rest. Let the final thoughts drift away like tiny clouds on a dark, calm sky. You are safe. You are still. You are drifting. The journey is over, and your gentle rest is now beginning. Sweet dreams.